October 25th, live on PBC on Prime pay-per-view from the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. Sebastian Fundora puts up his WBC Junior Middleweight Championship against former unified welterweight champion Keith one-time Thurman. And on the undercard, O'Shaquie Foster puts up his WBC Super Featherweight Championship against current WBC Featherweight Champion Stephen Fulton. Now, this fight with Fundora and Thurman really came out of nowhere, but I guess when you really put everything on the table, it really is a culmination of just how things ended up, materializing with Tim Tszyu initially being lined up to fight Keith Thurman. And, obviously things happen. Now, Sebastian Fundora, who he himself was lined up to fight Errol Spence Jr., who as of yet is yet to make a return since his loss to Terrence Crawford well over 2 years ago at this point. But this is really the PBC doing their matchmaking within the bubble. Sebastian Fundora, we've seen a guy that I feel is somebody that even with the loss, and this is yet a sign that a loss isn't the end of your career. He's been knocked out before, yet he is now the current WBC Junior Middleweight Champion, having now 2 wins over Tim Tszyu, and really in the second fight, he showed much more dominance. He's essentially becoming this fighter that I always say there's guys that learn that progress on the job. You have guys that have Olympic pedigrees, that have long amateur careers, and when they come into the pros, they're already in a lot of ways solidified. Where with Fundora, you're really seeing somewhat of the maturation, I should say, in real time, and we're seeing little things, little nuances that are showing a fighter that is progressing in his game. Where like in the second Tim Tszyu fight, he's using much more of a jab. He's starting to understand, like, I have a reach advantage. He still kind of keeps his head on a swivel, like he's not really moving his head that much. And even in the Tim Tszyu fight, the rematch, Tim Tszyu was landing some pretty big shots, but it just seemed like Fundora was able to take them much better than Tim Tszyu was taking them. Now with Keith Thurman, all of us here know, like, the big sticking point with him is just his inactivity in the last 5 years. He's had a history of injuries, okay? Like, that goes without saying. But from the Manny Pacquiao fight, which was well over 5 years ago at this point, he has been incredibly inactive, and he did have a fight recently in Australia, but that was his first fight in 3 years. And then prior to that, I don't believe he was in the ring for another 2 years prior to that. So that is an obvious concern going into this fight with Fundora, who again seems to be progressing, right? Where with Thurman, even with one loss, and this is why I say when people make the comment that, a fighter's only got one loss, what's the big deal? There's more context to that in boxing. I mean, you got to look at, again, inactivity. What have those fights looked like prior? Has the fighter taken beatings? How's he taking care of himself outside the ring? Those things parlay in the ring, and against a guy, number one, of Fundora's size, how he makes junior middleweight is just beyond me. And with Keith Thurman, he hasn't had a lot of stints at 154. So the question as far as like his overall power, and really right now, like, what form is Keith Thurman in? We know the Keith Thurman that fought Danny Garcia. We know the Keith Thurman that fought Sean Porter. But what kind of Keith Thurman do we have today going up against a guy in Fundora who, again, like I said, is vulnerable, but is starting to progress on the job? So you really wonder how that train, essentially, if you will, is going to clash, and which one is going to have the bigger impact on the other. So, like, right now, man, like, to be fair, okay, because of Fundora's vulnerabilities, you have to leave a bit of the door open for Keith Thurman. I mean, just to give him that respect. My biggest problem with him going into this fight, again, is just lots of inactivity in the last 5 years, constant injuries, and can he withstand, the punch output that Fundora is going to give him? Because really, if Keith Thurman is landing shots on him, but Keith Thurman's also receiving them. You just have to wonder what the wear and tear for a now 37-year-old, very, very, very inactive fighter is going to look like down the stretch in this fight. On the surface, like, I gotta lean towards Fundora because he's the younger, fresher, more active fighter. Even though, again, he has been knocked out, he has been hurt, okay? He's been dropped several times, but again, context is everything, man. And I'd love to see, the OG, now that Thurman can really be considered, pull off like a big win. And this arguably, not even arguably, this without a doubt would be his biggest win in years. I would say even before around the Sean Porter fight or Danny Garcia fight. But what kind of Keith Thurman are we going to see this October? And I think really that's the biggest question mark. And why Fundora going in should be the favorite. Now, O'Shaquie Foster and Stephen Fulton, this, for me, man, is one of the more interesting fights on this card. I mean, there is also going to be Shane Mosley Jr. and Jesus Ramos for, I believe it's for the mandatory position to face Carlos Adames for the WBC Middleweight Championship, which I'm looking forward to that one as well. But the O'Shaquie Foster and Stephen Fulton fight, which was supposed to take place on the Tank and Lamont rematch card that on August 16th, is now happening on this card. And this is a true pick'em fight because Stephen Fulton, yet again, another guy that had a loss, a knockout loss to Inoue, right? And I believe a fight or two later fights a Brandon Figueroa in the rematch to a first fight that could have swayed either way, but you can argue that was Stephen Fulton's one of his best performances of his career. Now he's going to try to become a 3-division world champion against O'Shaquie Foster, who also has a blemish on his career, though some would argue that Canseco fight, to be fair, I thought he won the first fight. He got the second fight, kind of corrected the wrongs of the first one, but I don't think this is, or at least should be looked at as, the smaller guy moving up and the bigger guy has the advantage. You got to look at the context of things, man. And I just think this could play out as a styles makes fights kind of scenario. O'Shaquie Foster is not that much bigger than Stephen Fulton. Obviously, Stephen Fulton's the one that has come up in weight, like from 118 and now it's, 130 pounds. But if his boxing ability and his speed and timing and how he really, for the most part, look against Brandon Figueroa, if any remnant of that shows up against O'Shaquie Foster, this is not going to be an easy night for O'Shaquie Foster. And even as I'm making this, man, like, I really can't, I have it really split down the middle. This fight can go either way. You got two world champions in opposing divisions, one below, one up, that are fighting each other, which very seldom do you see. Usually it's a guy moving up in weight and, he relinquished the title, but it's, in wrestling, back in the day in wrestling terms, you'd have the Intercontinental Champion, the World Champion fighting each other. So essentially you got the featherweight champion against the super featherweight champion, both WBC, and I am out of both fights, the main fight and this fight, this is the one I'm looking forward to the most because I really can't pick a winner. I think either guy can win this fight, and I would even argue that a win for either guy is like a feather in the cap, or one of the main feathers in the cap when you consider the opposition that both guys have faced. Now, to be fair, Stephen Fulton has fought the Inouye's, the Angelo Leos, and Brandon Figueroa's and guys like that. Where O'Shaquie, again, he did fight Canseco, but some people would argue is Canseco of that level. I mean, he's always been like a contender, but Fulton has fought champions, So I think the experience, you do have to favor Fulton in this equation, but you can't write off O'Shaquie like that. I mean, I think this is, again, a pick'em fight. I can't wait to see it. October 25th, live from the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. Sebastian Fundora, Keith Thurman, O'Shaquie Foster, and Stephen Fulton. And even with the O'Shaquie and Stephen Fulton fight, You have Top Rank and the PBC working together. You know, like, who would have thought, right? So I'll be tuned in. Let me know in the comment section. Like, subscribe. Who do you got winning these fights October 25th live on PBC on Prime?